Well, thanks a lot for staying with us here on Sunrise Live on E on this Monday morning. Now, in current affairs news making headlines this past weekend in the Sunday Times, we take a look at how Eskom lavished its boss's daughter with 1 billion rand in contracts. And in the City Press, President Jacob Zuma's decision to replace some of the most senior commissioners on the Judicial Service Commission just weeks before the body meets to interview a fresh crop of judges has raised some eyebrows within the legal profession. So joining us in studio to elaborate on these stories and more is independent political commentator Thabo, Shole, Mashao. We invite you as always to be part of our conversation. Remember to leave your comments on our Facebook as well as our Twitter pages. Thabo, always a pleasure to have you in studio.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. Good morning to you and to the viewers at home.
Now we're looking at the story. Let's start off with what's been happening with Helen Zille. I think it was a story even within the City Press in itself where they've been running with, since the actual tweets came out about colonialism and the benefits of colonialism, pressure has mounted from various oppositions of the DA to actually, put Helen Zille to book as a result of the comments that she articulated. Some actually saying that Mmusi Maimane, the DA leader, is actually afraid of Helen Zille because she was made by him, and he came out strongly against that. So what's the story there so far?
You'd remember where the story started when I think she was about to board the plane when Helen Zille started those tweets. I don't know what got into.
Her social media account?
Well, you see, the DA has got a social media policy, and it is a stringent regulatory process where they mention that if you tweet, amongst other things, or post on social media things that may be contrary to DA policies and DA stances and so on, you may be liable one way or the other. And this is not new. We saw when Diana Kolapana retweeted what happened to her not too long ago. But Helen went on to the spree of these tweets praising elements of colonialism, amongst others mentioning that we have the independent judiciary, which is a product of colonialism and some aspects of goodness of colonialism. And she goes on to mention 4 others. So here's the big question that I think as South Africans we have been missing. And I think this is where Helen Zille completely misses the ball. As to whether her tweets on colonialism, praising some elements of colonialism, are legal or not. As to whether they may be contravening policies of the DA, social media policies of the DA or not, or the South African Constitution or not, is completely irrelevant at this particular point.
So what's relevant?
What is relevant is the current political climate in South Africa as influenced by the historical context of this country, which brings you and I where we are today. Colonialism, imperialism, racism, slavery, and apartheid contributed heavily to the demise of this country and to the demise of the majority of the people of this country. So anything else that seeks to praise that will be viewed negatively, rightly so. So there's an issue here. It may not be illegal, but it is immoral. It is unacceptable.
So on that basis of immorality and unacceptability, and I see with what passion you're articulating this with, but do they have, or does the Democratic Alliance have grounds to recall it? Because she, actually, Mmusi Maimane, as was speaking to the City Press, was saying that she's going to be focusing more on the Western Cape government. But if you've got somebody who's governing the Western Cape with those forms of ideologies,
yeah,
you see, in the Western Cape.
And this is a true test. Unfortunately, it's not up to Mmusi Maimane to recall it, contrary to what everyone else believes. Simply because the DA has, like the ANC, they have internal disciplinary processes, and they have kicked off right now. So it's not up to Mmusi for him to stand alone up there like a dictator and saying you are fired. He will be taken to task and he will lose horribly in court and even within the DA structures. So sadly, Mmusi is carrying the burden that is not even his at this particular moment.
So in other words,
it is up to the DA.
Process to happen.
Yeah, we have to allow the DA, but equally so, it is a massive litmus test on the DA as to whether truly they are invested and interested in making sure that no elements of racism or any elements that may seek to undermine the majority of the country from their leadership is allowed space
well, one would
to
say
prevail.
that definitely the spotlight is on Musa. I want to move on to a story that is on the Sunday Times, one that we've been speaking about even in our news bulletin. They're speaking about the acting Eskom boss and his stepdaughter, who allegedly was given tenders worth over R1 billion, and she graduated 3 years ago. And it's been said that actually the boss, Matshela Koko, did not even know that she actually had this company that she was running, even though she was living in his house.
I mean, despite all, it gets better with time. You would think that these stories are a thing of the past, but it gets more interesting every single day, every single week we open up our newspaper pages. As you're rightly saying, they stay together. He stays with the mother and the daughter, and the daughter for the past 11 months or so was privy to a very lucrative deal.
Is it true that it's about 8 contracts that were actually passed over to her or to the account?
About 8 contracts or so, but then all of them, they amount to about R1 billion, and they have to do with Khusela, the very controversial Khusela power station. And one of the deals actually looks at how they were supervising the construction company. And if my figures are correct, according to the newspapers, it costed at about 78 million rands.
So 78 million rand to supervise? To
supervise the construction site. And there are other issues, cabling of the trunk and more million rands and so on. But here's a very interesting issue about this stuff. The acting CEO is not new to this controversy at all. Obviously, he takes over after the teary and controversial departure of Brian Molefe.
Who's now in Parliament.
But now, prior to that, the acting CEO was the executive of Generation. And this particular department was responsible for the contracts that were going out at the time.
He was in charge of the supply chain, as the news would actually have it.
Sure. But now, over and above this issue of you not knowing about your stepdaughter gaining over R1 billion, you are claiming ignorance, and it is said that the minister is saying that due process will take place, and if it is found that he is guilty, he's going to be booted out and disciplinary action will be taken. However, the point that I wanted to make very importantly is that he's not new to controversy of this nature at all. You'd remember with Tegeta, he was involved with prepayment of about 600 million rands to a Gupta-linked company, Tegeta.
Andile Lungisa will know, I think by this week, whether or not he's allowed to continue as the chairperson of Nelson Mandela Bay in the Eastern Cape as the ANC. President Jacob Zuma has sort of endorsed or given him the go-ahead in his seating, obviously quite to the opposition of the Secretary General, Gwede Mantashe, as well as we've got the Treasurer General as well coming out on that, saying that it's perhaps a very populist view and the stance of it, and obviously looking at issues around even land. So looking at Andile Lungisa, what's the story there?
You know, I mean, I remember attending, I think it was in 2012, if I'm not mistaken, the NGC of the ANC, which is the policy conference and known as the political school of the big political school of the ruling party. One of the key issues that was discussed at the time was this particular issue as to senior members of the ANC, whether they can actually contest lower positions because they would have undue influence on lower structures, meaning that if you are a member of the NEC, can you run for a provincial position?
So in other words, to be the executive mayor?
To be, the provincially, to become the TG of the province and so on, because you're coming from national, and obviously you would have undue influence because you have an overarching responsibility and so on. So, I mean, that's what the Secretary General is talking about in this particular issue, and that's why they're really on Andile Lungisa. However, we cannot be blind to the politics behind it. The politics behind it are that of inconsistency. This is not new. We've seen it happening in the West Rand before. We have seen this happening where a senior member at a higher structure contested elections at a lower structure. The question at hand is the inconsistency of the ANC in pursuing such contravenous of the ANC policy, if you will. And why is he being pursued with such vigor more than anyone else has? And we are not saying he's right, by the way. But also, Andile Lungisa's ambition and so much that he is not willing to even heed or give any indication whatsoever to say that I will.
A bit of a controversial individual. We remember him in chains at one point, right?
Of course. We all remember that, and we also remember him from the NYDA also controversies that are linked to that as the former chairperson. But now the issue is the inconsistencies of the ANC. And now it looks as if this issue is dividing the ANC in the middle, because on one hand, there was an implicit blessings upon Andile Lungisa's position by the president by going there, congratulating him, because the president should have known about what the party stance is. On one hand, the SG is saying that as the top officials, we have given him a letter to step back, and he seems to be going against us. Now, he must face the music, and the music would be the disciplinary committee. Is it being used as a political stick to deal with the anti-Zuma faction? We don't know.
Well, one would say that it's definitely a story to wait and see, and most importantly, it's a story that everybody is watching, whether you're an ANC supporter or not.